Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. It's time now to take your questions for attorney Robert David about medical malpractice. And remember, you can send in your questions any time of the week to the show on Twitter, on Facebook, or by email. We have a question here about the consent form, something that we talked about a little bit earlier. You have to sign those consent forms, but if you do that, do you waive your rights to file a negligent claim? Attorney David.
Not necessarily. First of all, you always can file a claim.
Okay.
You might lose it, but you can file it. So there's nothing to prevent people from filing claims. But the consent form is pretty broad. It lists everything that can, almost everything can go wrong with a procedure. But just because something goes wrong doesn't mean there was negligence. I'll give you, if I might, a simple example. During a surgery that's going to last for 2 or 3 hours, there is a requirement that the arm be placed in this position. And if the arm is placed in that position and the patient ends up with a serious shoulder problem that can't be fixed very well, then the consent form says you recognize that as something that can happen without negligence, and you have no cause that is going to be successful. But if the arm was placed this way for several hours during the surgery, then that is a breach of the standard of care, or medical malpractice, or medical negligence.
Okay.
And the consent form will not control that situation.
Seems like it could be a very fine line.
Let me just add to that. In other words, some nurse, maybe not well trained, maybe the doctor who's putting them in that position doesn't read the chart as he should or she should have, and the arm is in a position that any doctor who knows anything about what he or she's doing says, whoa, that's wrong. That arm should not be like that. That's going to do real damage. Never mind that there's a risk of damage. I know that that's bad. That arm in this position, like Mr. David, Robert just showed you, that can cause real harm, and then harm results. You know, the doctor gives you the this treatment, and it's the wrong treatment, but it causes you no harm. Well, that may be negligence, but that's not a case, luckily, because you didn't get hurt.
Right. And I think maybe that plays into our next question, which comes from Patrick from Mandeville. He says, does a misdiagnosis mean medical malpractice?
Not necessarily, but often it does. If you're looking at a pathology slide and you say this pathology slide is clear, there's nothing wrong with it, but in fact there are atypical cells or cells that suggest cancer, then that slide has been misread. There is a misdiagnosis. The patient will go on for quite some time. The cancer will advance and get worse, and perhaps there will be no chance of cure by the time it is detected. Same can occur with mammograms.
Yeah. Same thing, but a little bit more on that consent form. That consent form says you can die from a tooth extraction, you can die from anything. So with consent forms, what you want to be careful about is just because some bad result is on that consent form and a bad result happened, that doesn't mean no negligence. Sometimes they did something completely negligent, and it's a bad result that's listed on that consent form. You might want to talk to a medical negligence lawyer if you have the slightest worry or wonder, did a negligence occur? Okay.
All right. Mark writes in, he says, how long does a medical malpractice case typically take? Is there an average length of time that it takes to bring these cases for?
Well, a long time is the easy answer, because you have to get through the panel stage, which takes 1.5 years to 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And at the completion of the panel stage, if you're going to go forward in court, your case gets allotted to the bottom of the court's docket, and it takes another 2+ years to get to trial. So it can take a very, very long time, more than the usual tort case.
And then it could be appealed and go to the Court of Appeal, and that could add more time to it. We just had a case go to trial recently on a medical wrongful death case, and it took years to get to trial, and now we're waiting to see if defendants are going to pay the judgment or if they're going to appeal.
Okay, so it could take a long time and again can be very costly. Okay, another one from Teresa from Mandeville. She says, does medical malpractice apply to chiropractors and other alternative medicine specialties?
It does. Almost everyone in any kind of medically related field wants to be covered by the Louisiana Medical Malpractice Act, because you are afforded the short statute of limitations, you're afforded the cap on damages. So just about everybody is. If you find a doctor who is not covered by the act, chances are that's not a doctor you want to be visiting.
Okay, and you know, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because this is a point that we wanted to clear up. When we talk about medical malpractice and the lawsuits that are filed, they're not just filed against doctors. It could be against the hospital, it could be against a nurse, it could be against anyone and everyone associated with the health field. Is that correct?
Correct. Nurse practitioners, you know, internists interns who are doctors, residents.
Anyone in the health field. So here's a scenario that we sort of discussed a little bit earlier. Let's say that I have been to 3 or 4 doctors. I'm having issues. Nothing has been, I haven't gotten an accurate diagnosis. I finally make it to a 5th doctor who says, well, you should have had this test done, you know, many years ago. And now I'm at a point where my illness has progressed. I'm in the advanced stages here. What recourse, if any, do I have against the other doctors who I went to see?
Well, hopefully you learn that within the 3 years from the date of the first failure to diagnose. And if you have, then you have the same rights as you would ordinarily. That is, failure to diagnose is often malpractice, and you have a malpractice claim against that first doctor, or maybe the first 2 doctors.
The first 2 doctors, but again, that 3 years is critical here.
Critical.
Okay, all right. Brandon from New Orleans says, I'm on a prescription that requires regular visits to my doctor. If I miss an appointment, I won't be able to refill my prescription until I return to the doctor. However, my doctor is evasive and inaccessible. Sometimes it can take months for me to see him. Because I'm suffering during that time without a prescription, do I have some sort of action that I could bring against my doctor? Can I hold him responsible for my suffering?
I would say no. The only recommendation, if he's that bad, get another doctor.
Get a new doctor.
Get a new doctor.
That's the first thing that pops to mind.
Okay, all right.
You've got to have a good relationship with your doctor. And just so one point, we're not here to trash doctors. You know, the majority of doctors absolutely care about their doctors, nurses, medical providers, hospitals. They're there to tend to the sick, help people who are injured get better. We're only talking about the ones who occasionally screw up. If you have a car accident and you hurt somebody, we don't think you're a bad person either. That's why you have insurance. That's why these hospitals and doctors have insurance. But the injured people need to be compensated when negligence has caused the harm, and those who are negligent, if they're decent people, they want you to be compensated too.
Right, and as you mentioned earlier, it's not Monday morning quarterbacking, you said. That's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
Yes, you wanted to jump in.
No, that's a good point. You know, none of us gets up in the morning, gets in our car and says, I think I'm going to cause an accident today. But the best of us, the best drivers of us, sometimes do it. Sometimes we don't come to that complete stop at the stop sign. We don't see the red light. Things like that happen. That's why we have insurance. Same with the medical profession.
Okay.
Some very good doctors sometimes make mistakes. You just have to understand that.
Sure. Okay. Deb from Marrero asks, I was vacationing in Mexico and had to have an emergency medical procedure. Nothing went wrong, but if it had, would I have been able to sue for medical malpractice from the United States? For people who are traveling abroad, they need to be aware of what their rights are. So
Sounds
what
more
about
like your
this?
area, John.
Well, I do have a lot of contact with Mexico. I even have family there. But my understanding is, just like what happens to you here in the United States, here in Louisiana, the laws where the incident occurs generally dictate what your rights are. So if something happens to you in Mexico, the laws where the incident occurs dictate what rights you have, in all likelihood. But again, that would be something to talk to a lawyer about, let a law firm discuss that with you. Certainly in my office, we have contacts all over Latin America, and we have people such as myself who speak Spanish fluently. We'd be happy to investigate that. But it sounds like that didn't happen here, so good.
That was good, yes. Okay, Jimmy from Chalmette asks, can I sue my doctor for malpractice if he fails to diagnose me if he was relying on my own description of my illness? I'm not a trained medical professional. How am I supposed to know what's afflicting me?
Well, based on what you tell your doctor, he will order whatever tests he thinks are appropriate. If he does, fine. And if he doesn't, well, then you need to investigate why he did not.
Okay, so before we let you go here, what are just some important things that you want people to know about pursuing a medical malpractice claim, if in fact they believe they have reason to bring one?
It's kind of difficult for people, particularly in death cases, to come to grips with why they lost their loved one. And it may not occur to them for a long time that they should pursue a remedy. It's just a question of knowing the time limits. That's really it. Just do it before the time's up. 1 year, 3 years. 1 year from the day it popped into your head that you ought to do something really should be your rule.
To go ahead and start investigating and looking into it. Okay.
That's right.
All right. Well, we have learned a lot. Thank you so very much for being with us, Attorney Robert David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
That is all the time that we have for this show, but be sure to join us next week when we will take on another area of the law and find out how to protect your rights.
Thanks to my friend Robert David, and thanks to all of you for watching and for continuing to support the show on Twitter, Facebook, and for sending your great questions. Remember to visit jrpoa.com to watch whole episodes of the show, and we'll see you next week.